Thus far, we've talked about perception being the process of selecting, organizing, and then interpreting in order to make meaning out of different people or different experiences. Now let's move on to talking about perception and attribution. So when we observe others engaging in certain activities, we start to make these assumptions about, well, why would this person do this thing? Those motives are the attributions. Sometimes we focus on situational attributions. We assume that the other person's behavior is due to a situation. So for example, that friend who runs late. Well, maybe they're running late today because they got stuck in traffic, or maybe their boss held them a little bit later than usual. In this case, you're focusing on the external factors. You're focusing on, well, what could cause this person to do X, Y, Z? But some people focus on the interpersonal attributions, that others' behaviors are due to that person, their own characteristics. Now, if you're this type of person, you may think, oh, my friend just runs late because they don't care about me. They have horrible time management, and I just knew it. They wouldn't be here because they just don't care about being on time. They just want to make a scene and be late and be the center of attention. Again, you're focusing more so on the internal characteristics of that person for trying to describe, well, why would they be late? Then we have to think about fundamental attribution error. At times, we overestimate internal variables and even underestimate external variables. So this would be getting upset with that friend who was late because you assume they just don't care about you. But really, they were stuck in traffic. They tried to be on time, but there was an external factor there. Maybe you get upset when someone doesn't call you back. You think, man, I'm always the one doing so much work in this relationship. They just never care. But you forget to think about, well, do they have their phone with them? Is their phone even on? Can they text me? Are they in a meeting? Are they distracted by something else that could be taking them away from trying to talk to me? Again, fundamental attribution error. Now there are different factors that have some type of influence on our perception process. Some of those are physical. For example, our physiological state. If you're sick, if you're tired, if you're hungry, all those things are going to have an effect on how you perceive things. For example, when you're sick, you can't really taste food anymore. It all tastes the same, kind of bland. Because if you're sick, your taste buds are dulled and you can't really perceive the taste of the food the same way. Sometimes the physiological traits influence our perception. So I know that for me, I have pretty bad vision. If I take my contacts out, or if I'm wearing glasses, if I take my glasses off, it's really hard for me to see. Things get blurry. I can't perceive things as accurately as if when I have corrective lenses on. Or maybe you were like me. Maybe you would climb on top of your mom and dad's tabletops and countertops to try to reach the top shelf. Back then, it was an obstacle because you were shorter. But now that you're taller, you can reach it. It's no longer an obstacle. That perception of that top shelf has changed. Keep in mind that even our culture and our gender can influence our perception. If you remember from the previous chapter, we talked about all the different ways that cultures can be different, the dimensions of culture. So let's say that you are a part of a culture that is collectivistic, and you decide to go to a different country to study. And you're doing all these things to make your family proud. But you're a little sad because you still want to take that special class, that dream class that you've always wanted. And your roommate tells you, well, why don't you just take it? It's not like it's going to affect you. It's not going to affect your parents. Do what you want to do. Well, your friend comes from an individualistic culture. And from their perspective, the fact that you're not doing what you want to do with your own life is very confusing. And you see them as rude and maybe aggressive, and they see you as passive and maybe weak. Again, perception is completely changing how you see the same situation. Also think about how gender can influence your perception. So I remember writing a paper years ago about gender as it related to Huckleberry Finn. There's a point in the book, if you've read it, where Huckleberry Finn is trying to get away, trying to hide, and so he wears a dress. And all the men in the story start to look at him and think, wow, that's a weird girl. There is something not right about that girl. And then an older woman tosses an apple at Huckleberry Finn, and he catches it with his hands. And this older woman pulls Huckleberry Finn aside and says, "Who are you trying to fool? You may be able to fool the men around here, but you won't be able to fool the women around here." Because he didn't catch the apple right. Now, if you were to ask me, a girl can catch an apple just as easily as a boy with her own hands. But in the story, all girls were supposed to catch the apple with their skirt, to let the skirt of their dress hold the apple. And you can kind of still see some of this when we think about how gendered sports are. I know that a lot of times people will say, well, girls throw underhand and boys throw overhand. I know people who defy both of those rules on both sides of the spectrum. Here's a sign I recently saw: men working. Because this is a sign, I assume that this is not just a one-time sign, that there are multiple versions of the same sign around. And I started to think, well, are there only men working down there? Are there any women construction workers? What would happen if there were women construction workers? Would they need to change the sign? What was the perception now being set just by the sign saying men working? Food for thought. In addition to culture and gender, there can also be psychological influences that affect our perception. Probably the top things you can start thinking about when it comes to our psychological influences are biases and stereotyping. Now, a stereotype is any generalization that you make about a group of people that you apply to individuals. So keep in mind, stereotypes can be positive, such as people with large foreheads must have a big brain. Well, you're commenting that they're smart. But they can also be negative, such as blondes are dumb. Now you can see that probably not all people with large foreheads are probably smart, and not all blondes are dumb. So again, these stereotypes are not based on truth. They're based on generalizations. If you've ever seen the movie The Breakfast Club, you see how they stereotyped each other. One got labeled the criminal, one the athlete, one the basket case, the princess, and the brain. And for the early part of that movie, they all treated each other as such. But as they spent more time with each other, they realized they were much more than just those labels. They were much more than those stereotypes. Other factors that influence our perception include the primacy effect. The primacy effect just really says that first impressions are lasting. I remember meeting someone, and for some reason, the first time I met her, I just did not like her. I'm not sure if it was something in the way she said it or the situation, but it was really, really hard for me to ever start to like this person just because the first impression was so lasting. Then there's the recency effect, where the most recent impression is the one that's the strongest. So think about someone who you weren't so sure about the first time you met them, but then they did something that just blew your socks off. They really impressed you. Because of that recent event, that recent impression, you have a positive view of them. That's the recency effect in motion. There are some other things that also affect our impressions, such as a positivity bias. If you have a positivity bias, you probably see the world through rose-colored glasses. You tend to highlight and overemphasize positive information and characteristics when you make a first impression. But some people have a negativity bias. They just are unhappy or not interested. And because of that, they start to pick out the negative pieces of information and qualities in a person or a situation. Or maybe there's even that bias of being egocentric. So if you struggle with egocentrism, you think that the entire situation revolves around you. That's all about me. So you tend to believe that people are going to do and experience things the same exact way that you would experience them. And if someone's interacting with you, all of their actions must be directed in either that they like you or that they don't like you. So again, you make yourself the center of attention, when maybe they don't even notice you in the room, or maybe they're not out to get you, they're maybe not trying to impress you, they're just living their life. So now we've covered some of the different ways in which our perception influences how we perceive other people. Everything from those attributions to even the biases that we have that can influence us positively or even negatively.